All right, let's talk about one of the biggest turning points in human history. I'm talking about the agricultural revolution. It's the moment we, as a species, stopped wandering and started putting down roots. It's literally the foundation of the world we live in right now. But here's the big question. Was it the amazing dawn of civilization we all learned about in school? Or was it the moment we walked into a trap we've never managed to escape?
You know the story I'm talking about, right? It's that classic tale of progress. Humanity gets smarter, we figure out how to tame nature, grow our own food, and finally kiss the brutal, short life of a hunter-gatherer goodbye. It's always painted as this great leap forward for all of us. But what if that story has it all wrong? That's a quote from the historian Yuval Noah Harari, and it really throws a wrench in the old story. The whole argument here is that agriculture wasn't some brilliant choice we made. It was a trap we stumbled into. And honestly, when you look at the evidence, it's pretty hard to argue with.
So, to really get why someone would call it a fraud, we first have to be super clear on the story it's up against, what you might call the myth of progress. The textbook version goes something like this. We invent farming, which gives us a ton of extra food. With all that food, we can finally stop moving around and settle down. That leads to villages, then cities, and boom, you get writing, science, art, the whole shebang we call civilization. It's a really neat, tidy story, isn't it? A perfect path to a better life. The problem is, the archaeology tells a much darker story.
Okay, so now let's peel back that heroic story and look at what the science, the skeletons, the artifacts, the actual evidence really tells us. Let's put the life of your average hunter-gatherer right next to an early farmer and see what we find.
First off, let's just talk about the daily grind. Hunter-gatherers, they had a surprisingly chill lifestyle. They'd work maybe 3 or 4 hours a day to get what they needed. Farmers, on the other hand, oh man, they were tied to that land, toiling from sunrise to sunset, clearing fields, planting, weeding, hauling water. It was endless work.
And it wasn't just about the hours they put in, it was the food itself. Our foraging ancestors ate an incredibly diverse diet. Think about it. Nuts, berries, all kinds of different meats and wild plants. Early farmers, they often ate little more than a single, boring staple crop like wheat or corn. It wasn't just bland, it was actually really bad for them.
And that dramatic shift in diet, it had devastating effects on their health. I mean, living crammed together in permanent settlements created the perfect breeding ground for epidemics. And basing your entire diet on one crop meant that if that crop failed because of a drought or pests, you got catastrophic famine. That's a risk hunter-gatherers with all their different food sources almost never had to face. The skeletons from this era tell the story. Farmers were shorter, sicker, and died younger than the foragers who came before them.
So here's the bottom line. For the average person, life didn't get better. It got harder, it got less healthy, and way less secure. So that leads to a huge question. If it was such a terrible deal for the individual, how did this system not only survive, but completely take over the world and build massive empires? Well, the answer, surprisingly, has less to do with the people doing the farming and everything to do with what they were farming. The special properties of cereal grains like wheat and barley made them the absolute perfect tool for building something totally new to humanity: the state.
We have this idea that as soon as people started farming, kings and empires just popped up. But when you look at the timeline, you see that's just not true. There's actually a huge and really telling delay. Just look at this. The very first signs of agriculture show up around 9500 BCE. But the first states, they don't appear until after 3100 BCE. That is a gap of more than 4,000 years. For millennia, people were farming in settled communities without anything that looked like a state. So what was the missing ingredient that changed everything? The missing ingredient was grain. See, staple grains are the perfect foundation for a state because they're the perfect thing to tax. Think about it. A field of wheat is right there, out in the open. When you harvest it, the grains are easy to divide up, count, and you can store them for a really long time. A tax collector can just show up and take his cut. Now, try doing that with potatoes. The crop is hidden underground and it rots pretty quickly. Grain, though, it was the perfect resource for a ruler to control. And this really shows you what the early state was all about. It wasn't some cool club people were lining up to join. No, it was a machine of control. It was designed to keep a bunch of grain-producing people in one place, take their surplus crops through taxes, and then defend that stash of grain from everyone else.
The state wasn't built on making life better. It was built on a taxable harvest. But this new system, built on a mountain of surplus grain, didn't just create kings and tax collectors. It created entirely new concepts, ideas that now, today, pretty much rule our lives, like private property, inheritance, and social class.
It's this fascinating domino effect. First, you get this massive surplus of grain, which is basically the first form of storable wealth. That immediately creates the need for the idea of private property. But as soon as you have property, you have to ask, who gets it when I die? And there you have it, the birth of inheritance. And to make sure your property goes to your kids, you have to control who your kids are. All of a sudden, marriage gets totally transformed into an economic contract for passing down wealth.
And right alongside property, you get hierarchy. That grain surplus could now feed a small group of people who didn't have to farm at all. Kings, priests, soldiers, administrators. This elite group controlled the surplus, and by doing that, they controlled the whole society. For the very first time in human history, we see social classes emerge. A tiny, powerful elite and a massive majority of peasants whose hard labor paid for the entire system.
So, after looking at all this evidence, how should we think about this revolution? Was it the moment that saved humanity, or was it the moment we locked ourselves in chains?
It really does look like a kind of devil's bargain. On the one hand, pretty much everything we call civilization, our amazing cities, our science, our art, even the writing on this screen, it was all built on the foundation of that agricultural surplus. But on the other hand, that very same foundation brought us class divisions, patriarchy, horrible wars over resources, and plagues that wiped out millions. So the question I really want to leave you with is this. When we look at our world today, with all of its incredible achievements and all of its deep inequalities, are we seeing the triumph of the agricultural revolution, or are we still just trapped by its consequences? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.